Greetings, everyone. I hope your day is off to a fantastic start, like it is for mine and Bob's. My name is Avel Espiritu, and I'm from Red 5 Lean Performance, and it's my honor today to be your host. But before we dive into our presentation, just a few housekeeping notes. Please keep your microphones muted during the presentation for optimal audio quality. However, feel free to unmute yourself when we open the floor for questions later on. Also be aware that today's session is being recorded for future access. So today I represent Lean-YEG, a devoted committee of volunteers organizing the Edmonton Lean Community of Practice. We host Lean coffee sessions every third Friday from September to June, providing a very unique space for passionate Lean practitioners like yourselves to engage in insightful discussions, expand knowledge, and explore practical applications of Lean methodologies. Now let's shift our focus to today's presentation topic, which is the gap between how Kaizen is commonly understood in practice and how Kaizen should be understood in practice. Despite being a foundational practice for many Lean organizations in the past, Kaizen has experienced a decline in popularity. It's been largely overshadowed by alternative methodologies such as value stream maps, gemba walks, A3s, and kata. Additionally, even those cases where organizations are practicing Kaizen, it's still being employed, it tends to be in diluted forms and it yields unsatisfactory results. So today, the Lean Community of Practice of Edmonton is pleased to welcome back our esteemed speaker for today, a distinguished practitioner and professor in Lean management for nearly 30 years, renowned author of 28 books and counting. I don't think he's ever going to stop.
No, I've decided to stop.
That's what you said last time.
Well, no, this time it's official. I wrote a blog post that said why I quit writing, why I stopped writing books.
Well, I hope you still continue to write though, or at least with the blogs for sure.
Yeah, it'll be stuff on the blog and in social media posts and stuff like that. Can't stop thinking, but I can stop writing books.
Well, we'll see what happens. But he's at 28 for now. And so it's my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Bob Emiliani. Off to you, Bob.
Thank you very much. And let me share a file here. And okay, first problem is I don't see it. I see it. Okay, bear with me here. It's not.
So just those of you know, Bob says he retires all the time. And he keeps on coming back. So
I see. There we go. Yes.
I'm pretty sure there's going to be a 29th book at some point, or 28.5.
Well, yeah, I don't know. So can you see the screen? Closing the gap?
Yes, we can.
Okay, yep. Wonderful. Let's just get started then. So I think some of you must know my background just briefly. I was in industry for a number of years, worked in different functional areas. Then I transitioned to higher ed, where I taught courses that had a significant theme of lean management. And I've been involved in, doing a lot of writing. And as you can see, all my degrees are in engineering. But really, to make headway on some of the topics that I've written about, I had to make a shift a long time ago from out of engineering and into various social sciences. So self-taught in that arena. So this was a recent, the image on the right was a recent thing that I posted on LinkedIn for Halloween. Thinking for yourself is super scary. And it is a bit scary because we tend to rely on what other people think and what other people have to say. And especially when you're in a hierarchical organization, such as working at a company, we all know that there's some pressure to conform to the way people think and do things. And so if you think for yourself and say some things that are a little bit wild, that can set some people. But one of the things that, of course, we learn in Toyota and the Toyota Way is the emphasis on the need to learn to think and to think for ourselves rather than being dependent on others to think for us. Now, of course, we all know that Toyota is a bit of a unique environment where, people are allowed to think and understand the work they're doing and think of ways to improve things and try them out and so on. And there's a management support for that. That doesn't exist in a lot of organizations, or it exists, but in a kind of a weak form, or it depends on the particular manager that you happen to have or supervisor. So it can be quite scary, and I think all of us who are devoted to lean have at probably many points in our career spoke up and said things that have gotten us into a little bit of trouble. So for different reasons, it can be a bit scary, but nevertheless, we keep trying to move things forward. So one of the things to me that's a disappointment is that there are certain people who occupy the position of being a top lean promoter and influencer. And my observation is that their effect is essentially to generate a herd mentality, to follow, to adopt and use, and thus follow the use of certain lean tools. And these become long-lasting fads. Um, Something like a value stream map, which came out in 1999, which when I was learning Kaizen, we never used a value stream map at all. We made enormous improvements in our processes and created flow in our processes without value stream maps. But a colleague of mine recently did a survey on LinkedIn that asked the question, do you need value stream maps to do value stream maps before you improve? And something like 80% of the people said, yes, you have to draw a map first. And this is 2023. So here we are 24 years later after the book workbook Learning to See came out. And it's become something of a type of fad. And it also reflects people aren't thinking for themselves. It's like the question is, do you really need to use to draw a value stream map before you get started with your improvement activity? So what these generating this herd mentality to follow the use of certain tools and so forth, of course, is very good for business. It's great for selling workbooks and training workshops and the like. And but it's bad for progress because people, fundamentally don't understand certain things, and they think they need certain things when they don't, and consequently, the kind of progress you would hope to see being made is not. And so, for a long time ago, Kaizen fell out of favor within the lean community. In fact, in 2013, so 10 years ago, when Shingijutsu asked me to write a book about Kaizen, I said, why? Why bother? This would have been an interesting book in 1999, 2000, 2005, 1995, 1990, 1987. But why now? Because the lean world has gotten taken over with value stream map, gemba, walk A3 reports, which, by the way, are all derivatives of Kaizen practice. That's another odd thing about all of this, is that the derivative methodologies that came out of Kaizen end up becoming what's important, not Kaizen itself. So it's just a real strange circumstance. And you'll see a blog post coming up soon called too much reverse alchemy. Instead of turning lead into gold, we have a lot of folks in lean world turning gold into lead. Anyway, so what is the simple fact here is that Kaizen is the principal method by which Toyota's production system was created. So we all revere Toyota Production System, Toyota Way. This was really just fundamentally comes from the reading, writing, and arithmetic that Kaizen is, and yet still to this day remains poorly understood and poorly practiced. And it is such an invigorating thing, and such a platform for exercising one's creativity and so on, and yet it just loses out to these various tools. Now, I recognize, of course, in companies, in a hierarchy, a lot of organizations, the leadership doesn't want the kind of change that Kaizen can bring about, because it means really sort of bumping heads with the ways that leaders think, and batch and queue processing compared to flow, and turning everything into a Gantt chart and a project management kind of template, and always trying to figure out return on investment for things. And so it really bumps up against a lot of things, a lot of ways of thinking and doing things that are anti-lean, anti-Kaizen, but they don't know it because they're mired in classical management. So what's happened? Matt Elson, you may see some of his posts on LinkedIn. periodically said an interesting thing the other day in relationship to a post that I made. He said, it's interesting how Kaizen is generally acknowledged to be central to TPS and TPS development, but it is rare to see or experience such a relentless focus on Kaizen. And he's describing that in relation to his experience in working at Toyota, relentless focus on Kaizen. And it is indeed strange. The places that have visited in the past, and of course, COVID disrupted those visits. So during that period, it was the people that I talked to from different companies and so forth. And some of those visits, I've resumed. But I don't see much in the way of Kaizen, or if I do see Kaizen, it's more of a kind of a rote type of practice with very little creativity. It's been reduced to kind of a typical problem-solving approach and not the creative type of problem-solving that it is meant to be. So what is Toyota-style Kaizen? It's a practical combination of industrial engineering, trial and error, scientific thinking that inspires human creativity to solve difficult problems in simple ways. And Kaizen places a lot of constraints upon people. So if you're part of a Kaizen team that's been, doing a Toyota-style type of Kaizen, you have a lot of constraints applied to your Kaizen activity. So you have certain problem in your company, lead time, whatever it may be, setup reduction, and you're given constraints of, well, you can't spend money, you cannot hire more people, you cannot buy new equipment, you can't have more new software. So anyway, there's a whole list of different constraints that are typically applied to Kaizen teams. And what that does is it forces you to be creative, because you don't have all the usual go-to things like, well, if I just spend, $5,000 for this software package, we've solved the problem, or $50,000, or $100,000, or $1 million, 10 million, whatever it is. And there are famous stories within Toyota how the Kaizen team will come up with, I remember one in particular about some ergonomic problem, like getting inside the car to, install something in the roof or whatever, wherever it is inside the car. And the Kaizen team comes up with a solution that cost $2,000, and the supervisor said, no, please go back and think about that some more and how to do this. Then they come back with an order of magnitude reduction. They say, well, it'll cost $200. The supervisor says, no, please think about it some more, and adds more constraints, too much money. And then finally come back and they figure out a way to fix it for no money. And you can imagine the huge impact that this has in an organization compared to its competitors, who are always spending money to solve problems. And with Toyota Kaizen, you're spending ideas to solve problems. And when you spend ideas to solve problems, that creates a pool of money that is unspent that, is going to show up into things that the company needs to do to maintain its competitiveness, but also it's going to show up in the ability to, increase wages and pay whatever benefits and so forth, and contributions to savings plans and the like. Meanwhile, your competitor is burning through money all the time and is more heavily indebted and so forth. So, so this is the, kind of the essence of this. And really, this is the reading, writing, and arithmetic of process improvement. Yet people have jumped to geometry, trigonometry, calculus by going to these other lean tools, which are not so difficult to use, but they don't understand the fundamental basis from where they came from. So to me, the Western interpretation of Toyota production system and the Toyota way look like the image on the left side, this lean house, a jumble of things that are added onto the house. And you'll notice at the bottom of the house, on the left side of the blue house, it says lean equals TPS. And that was kind of the original going in perspective of lean back in 1988 as being a generic term for TPS in the Toyota way. But that soon gave way to just, sort of deconstructing TPS in the Toyota way into various tools and producing workbooks and so forth, and other types of documentation that talk about these tools in an individual kind of way. And it makes for a big jumble. And then on the right-hand side, of course, you see the house that the Kaizen built, which was goal of TPS is highest quality, lowest cost, shortest lead time, which is generally applicable to any kind of organization, any kind of business. It could be healthcare. Obviously, you want highest quality. Costs are generally a problem all the time with healthcare. And of course, you want service. You don't want to wait 6 months for your operation or whatever. So shortest lead time. And then, of course, you see the two pillars, just in time and Jidoka, automation with a human touch, and what falls below that. So it's always odd to me that Lean headed off in a direction that was started to deconstruct things, do the reverse alchemy, turning gold into lead, because what you see on the right hand side, the TPS house is gold, turning it into lead on the left hand side, and just making a confused situation out of all of this, and not really understanding the history of progressive management, where this turning the gold into lead, deconstructing the system into component tools to be used within an organization that otherwise remains classically managed. That's part of the history of progressive management, that sort of thing happening. And if people had understood that going into this, you might have a little bit different outcome in some companies. There still would be a lot of companies that are like, no thanks, we don't want a new management system, we just want to add tools to the already overflowing toolkit of, on the corporate internal website of the tools that people can draw upon to solve, various problems that they encounter. So, really, to understand the Kaizen mentality is to understand what Mr. Nagamatsu says in this quote, is that we're always at our worst. You may think you are a good company today, but make no mistake, you are not. You may become better tomorrow, but still you are toward the back. At any moment, somewhere in this world, there is someone doing the same work better. There is no end. You must continually seek to improve. And one of the problems with, companies and hierarchies and the need to, deliver good news to bosses is you start to lose sight of the fact that you're in a competitive environment. They're out there, people doing the same work better. We're getting complacent because we believe our own, annual report, our own headlines of how great we are, whatever the internal rhetoric of how fabulous everything is. And when darn well it's not, so there's a lot of gaslighting going on trying to convince you that the reality that you see is not actually real, that it's, things are much better than that. But to really actualize Kaizen, bring it into practice on a daily basis, you have to start thinking this way. And I've showed this slide a number of times to people especially at high level, and they usually are offended by this slide because they have a vision of themselves and the organization as being much better than it actually is. And also because they're usually disconnected from what's going on down below, so they don't get the real story from people because they're afraid to deliver it. But this is the kind of mindset that you have to have. This is a quote from Oswald Knauth from a book called Advanced Management Quarterly from the 1940s. And he was in the retail business, the department store business, and he captured a thought here that absolutely reflects or parallels what Mr. Nagamatsu is saying, but in a very different way, maybe a little bit nicer way, that every organization constantly deteriorates. And this is especially true of a business organization. It loses customers, it loses personnel, its physical equipment is constantly wearing out and becoming obsolete. It's the primary function of management to rebuild at a rate that exceeds these losses. Management can never rest. If it does, the organization deteriorates. It must attract new customers, must provide for trained replacements in advance of necessity, and it must study new inventions, new devices, and better methods. It must initiate a flow of experiments. So he's saying a company must essentially be like a laboratory. And of course, that's what we learned from TPS and others like them before in the days of scientific management and so forth. You turn your organization into a laboratory where people are allowed to think and try new things and be creative and so forth. And there's some key points here of just things changing and wearing out. Management can never rest. Well, typically management does rest. Now you got to understand that if you're in their shoes, that you have been, in the workplace 30 years, 25, 30, 40 years, and now you're at a high level in the organization, and you're probably pretty satisfied with your advancement and the money you make and the status and prestige and so forth. So it's very tempting to rest and to ignore problems and take it easy because you're probably somewhat burnt out. Uh, but in doing so, the organization deteriorates, and that puts everybody at risk: the employees, the customers, the suppliers, the investors, the community. And you must provide for trained replacements in advance. How often have you seen people leave, important, at lower levels, important people with important knowledge, you've told management so and so's leaving. We need to backfill ahead of time so we can transfer the knowledge from them to somebody else. And management says, no, we can't. There's no money in the budget to do that. So management must be out there studying new inventions, new devices, and so forth, and making it okay for people to try to experiment. So you may have seen this slide before that I've showed. Their improvement secret is simply to try it and see. On the left-hand side in scenario X, there's only one answer to the problem. And whatever problem you have at work, lead time, quality, et cetera, is shown here, and mathematically is, your quality, lead time problem, et cetera. There's one answer, one solution. And this is the kind of boss who basically says, do it my way or do it the way it's always been done. Whereas in scenario Y, it's try it and see. You don't know, the goal, the answer is 7, which represents the goal of cut lead time in half by 50% or improve quality by 75% or 275%. We tend to think of improvement as 5, 10%. And then with Kaizen, we think, how do we improve at 3x, 4x? And so that's our goal. And even if we fall short, we had, let's improve quality, 300%, and it ends up being 210%. We've still done a great thing, whereas our competition's fooling around trying to improve quality 5 or 10%. So the empty boxes there mean there's infinite answers to the problem of how do we get there. So to do that, we have to allow people to think. You need a flow of ideas. People are not allowed to think. They don't have the flow of ideas, and the flow of ideas is the basis for experimentation. And of course, to do that, managers have to trust and respect people. And in a lot of organizations, managers don't trust and respect people. There is a group think at high levels of organization that's very common. And the group think, to fit in with that crowd, you kind of have to adopt the mindset of everybody else, and especially the top leader. And when things go wrong, their view is well, somebody at the bottom screwed things up. It's people at the bottom who are always messing things up and creating a headache for me. And they don't do a good job. They don't understand the importance of things, and so I don't trust them, and I don't really respect them because if there was flawless execution all the time, then I'd trust and respect them, but there isn't. So it's just kind of, they're living an unreality of not knowing what's going on. It's driving the problem. So daily Kaizen activity is really important. Henry Gantz said a long time ago, the usual way of doing things is always the wrong way. And the usual way of doing things is typically scenario X. Now, every now and then you find people do things in an unusual way that aligns with scenario Y. But for the most part, the usual way of doing things is always wrong. But yet we just accept it and say, well, this is the way it's done. So think about it this way. If the company has a certain process for doing something, then you join the company and you're assigned to that process. And somebody's going to tell you, this is how we do it. And so you just say, okay, well, somebody must have figured it out that this is the right way to do it. So I'm just going to play my part in this process and do it this way. And of course, every now and then somebody comes along as a new hire and says, well, this seems to be a stupid way of doing it. Why don't you do it this way? And maybe they're heard, but more likely they're not heard. But we have to hear these people, and especially people from other functional areas that come to see how we're doing things. And can ask these kind of questions. And why do you do it that way? That's why the Kaizen teams should be cross-functional, so you get those outside eyes. So here's an approximate timeline. Don't take it as gospel, but Kaizen is really the problem-solving foundation. As I said earlier, it's the reading, writing, arithmetic of improvement, and we need to master the basics. And fundamentally, the basics, as you'll see in a moment, is about understanding the work. And so later on, things like PDCA and training within industry come along, and specifically job methods. Then different industrial engineering methods come into the picture at Toyota, and then QC tools, A3 report, Toyota business process, the 8-step. This is kind of a timeline of what's cooking at Toyota in terms of different problem-solving methods that are coming out of this Kaizen practice that's being practiced consistently over this time period and still today, of course. And so Kaizen is at the root. It is the fundamental thing that we need to understand and do. Well, why do we need to do it? I mean, is it just plainly for improvement? Okay, yeah, we need to improve it. So what? What are we trying to improve? We're trying to create material and information flow and do so at low or no cost to establish what's called a normal condition. Because the normal condition, for example, if you look at a river or a stream, the normal condition is to flow. When water doesn't flow, it stagnates. So if you're camping out and so forth, and you're going to take water from a natural source, you're not going to fill up your canteen in a stagnant pool of water because you'll get sick. That's the abnormal condition. You're going to try and find a place where there's running water, looks clear, fresh, so forth. That's the normal condition. So we want to establish the normal condition in our workplace, in our particular process or piece of the process, to enable the recognition of when an abnormal condition arises. And that everybody says, time out, let's correct this abnormal condition. But we're doing more than just that. We're also developing people, teaching people how to think. We are engaging them in terms of their devotion to their job, their devotion to improvement, their devotion to the company, and their responsibility to the company as well. So you're trying to do more than the sort of simple, yeah, we need to improve a process here. We're trying to set up a condition where it becomes obvious when things aren't right, so that we can immediately rectify the situation, not wait around, get it rectified quickly. Oops, let's go to the next one here. We're also trying to deal with the ever-present problem of irrationality in business organizations. And I'm sure you must shake your head sometimes and say, why are we doing it this way? Why did the leader, the vice president, make this decision? It seems to actually hurt our customers, not help them, or it's not good for us internally, whatever. With Kaizen, we're trying to rationalize irrationality. In other words, fix irrationality, correct the human propensity for irrationality, create standards that are absent of irrationality, destroy the metaphysical foundations of irrationality. Because if we have a flawed metaphysical foundation of irrationality, then we'll confront the problem, our solution will be irrational, and therefore we will confront the problem again, we'll further apply some kind of irrational solution, and on it goes. So we will forever be creating more and more problems as we go, as depicted in this left-hand image. If we have a traditional metaphysical foundation where everything has to look pretty, we got to deny the reality of our problems, we have to, we band-aid problems, they tend to grow over time. What I call the pyramid of irrationalities. You see this very unstable inverted pyramid, and problems grow and grow over time. And yeah, these depictions are a little bit of an exaggeration for sure, but they're to put across a point here, a concept. And with Kaizen, we have a different metaphysical foundation, such as what we learned from Mr. Nagamatsu, or that's the right way to think, or Mr. Oswald Noth, excuse me. And that when we have a problem, we have a rational solution, and problem recurs, and we, over time, our problems shrink. So we have the pyramid of rationalities, and we have a more stable situation in our company over time, less craziness going on in our company. But to do all of this, we have to understand the work, and this is what people have lost touch with by immediately going to the geometry, the trigonometry, the calculus, the A3 reports, the gemba walks, and the value stream maps, and so forth. You have to fundamentally understand the work that people are doing. And you see it in these various charts of, a Yamazumi chart and time observation form, standard work chart, target progress report, etc. standardized worksheet. And basically, you're using your creativity to create a flow of work that is paced by the market demand. And if you don't know how to create a standard worksheet, how to use a time observation form, this is reading, writing, arithmetic of improvement. And yet everybody's jumped to these other things. And this is the foundational activities that you do in Kaizen. One of the other things that's happened, of course, is the atomization of these various tools and methods. So what started to emerge 2 decades ago or more than that was things like a 5S Kaizen or a value stream mapping Kaizen or a setup Kaizen. When we did Kaizen back in the old days, we did all that stuff all at once. We didn't atomize it. We did 5S concurrently with setup reduction, concurrently with the other things that we did. There's a chart that I have that shows we did 14 things concurrently that today have been atomized into 14 separate Kaizen activities. And so something's way off here. Anyway, I always like this slide because basically scenario X and the perpetuation of problems, the unstable pyramid of irrationalities, this kind of stuff really breaks people. Sooner or later, you're just going to say, okay, I'm just going to do my job. They pay me. I'm going to go to work, do my job, not worry too much about stuff. Or just go to the job and say, the boss, and say, just tell me what you want, boss, and I'll just do it. But we're wasting people's lives when we have a situation like scenario X. And so what we really want to have is an organization that has scenario Y. Of course, this is difficult because most leaders are not real interested in having people think. They believe, since they don't trust and respect people, they believe that the people at lower levels will just disrupt things and create all kinds of problems and more headaches for the people higher up in the organization. That the lower level people just wreck things somehow, but they don't. So I did a podcast a while ago, and I said a thing here. The thing that struck me that was for all the education that I've had and all the teachers that tell you their main goal is to teach critical thinking. I learned more in that 1 week Kaizen with Shingijutsu about critical thinking that I had learned in everything through my PhD. And I was really stunned by that because you got to imagine that in our work area, this was back at the aerospace company I worked for, you had a lot of intelligent people who created this process, and they graduated from the best schools, and the folks on the shop floor were intelligent people with vast experience. And you sit there and you say, this is a completely irrational. I mean, if you ask people, figure out the worst way to make whatever it was we were making, that's what it would be. But nobody said that, figure out the worst way to make it. But the way that the system was such that people weren't allowed to think. When they raised their hand and said, I got a better way to do it, the boss said, shut up, just do it the way we've always been doing it. So with Kaizen, you have a rational, skeptical, unbiased analysis or evaluation of factual evidence. If you look at people doing the job, you'd say, factual evidence, rational mind, skeptical thinking, you'd say that's a huge ergonomic problem. Or that person's struggling. They're trying to fit, item A to item B, and it's taking them 10 minutes when it should be, a snap fit or take 5 seconds. So this is the divergence between, problem solving, which is kind of the routine or the common way that people understand problem solving and the common way they go about solving problems, compared to Kaizen, which is completely different, 2 different things. I'll try to illustrate it in this diagram here, where Kaizen, where if you look at type 2 lean, where you just have some lean tools that you apply, there's some small gains, there's no change in preconceptions, there's no change in thinking like what Nagamatsu was talking about. You engage in what's called single loop learning. I'll show you an example of that in a minute. And then you basically have the status quo. You have some improvement, but not much improvement. And with Kaizen, you have discovery and the large gains that go with that because you're experimenting and trying new things. changes in preconceptions, you have double loop learning, and your organization evolves and progresses in step with the times. And that, go back to what Mr. Knopf said, Oswald Knopf, about companies constantly deteriorating. But things are constantly changing. Tomorrow's different than today. Customer wants and needs will be different tomorrow compared to today. So you have to evolve and progress in step with the times. You're not going to do it with just a sort of limited understanding and limited use of lean tools. And that puts everybody at risk. So with lean tools, you see the single loop learning, which basically going into at the bottom right of the top diagram, you'll see the mental model that we have of how the world works. Boss wants us to do the job this way. We make decisions that leads to decision-making rules, that we make decisions based upon those rules. We engage the real world with some kind of problem. We have some information feedback, but fundamentally the mental model doesn't change. And so consequently, whether we know it or not, we have the attitude of whatever is right. We don't ask questions. Whereas with Kaizen, we have a mental model, we have some decision-making rules, we make a decision, we encounter the real world, we get some information feedback, but based upon our practice of Kaizen with all the constraints and so forth that are applied to solving our problem, we have a change in our mental model. And we start to understand, like what Henry Gant said, the usual way of doing a thing is always wrong. We instead adopt the attitude of whatever is wrong. Or if not that, we would say whatever is certainly far from where it should be, and that needs to be improved until you start to ask questions. And we all recognize that asking questions in a company can be a dangerous thing, but this is what needs to happen in order to make progress with Kaizen. The other thing is you have to start to think like a craftsman, because with all the constraints that you have, Kaizen activity, you can't spend money, buy new software, knock out a wall and, add 10,000 square feet and so forth. You have to start to become creative, and craftsmen are creative because typically it's hard to earn a living being a craftsman. And so you have to use your intelligence. And instead of spending a lot of money on things that would, eat into your income, you have to get creative, and you have to engage in something that we call moonshine with Kaizen. You think about somebody who in Appalachia in the States or wherever in Canada that makes alcohol. Moonshine is produced using found pieces of metal and so forth, and soldering them or welding them together, just junkyard parts to be able to make something that produces alcohol. And if it doesn't work, it blows up. Well, then you try again with your limited money, limited equipment, limited resources, but use your ideas and creativity to figure out how to make a working still. So I had a similar challenge way back when, designing and building bicycle frames. And in my senior year of high school, I designed jigs to be able to hold the tubes in place while I raised them. And then upon graduating high school, I built my first bicycle frame. So I had very little money. I had tubes and detail fittings. I had a little bit help from my father with basically buying some, files and sandpaper. But basically, hand tools, a couple of power tools, electric hand drill, a Dremel moto tool. None of the usual stuff that people have when they're building bicycle frames, and in a small space to do it in. But I successfully did this, and I went on to build 10 or so more bicycle frames until graduate studies caught up with me, and I couldn't do that anymore. But I had a goal to build bicycle frames. How am I going to do it? If you look at the top right, scenario Y, I don't know, just got to experiment and try things. There weren't books written on how to do this and so forth. You have to figure it out. And same thing with Kaizen in a company. The left-hand side shows one of the things you want to achieve in Kaizen is to eliminate batch processing of steps that disrupt the flow of the process. So what you see on the left-hand side, you can barely see it, is a stamping machine that produces parts that accumulate in a bin, and then the bin of parts they get put into a washing machine, 500 or 1,000 pieces at a time. And of course, you have a process of stamping here that's 1 part, 1 second, but then it gets batched into a washing machine, and so that disrupts the flow. In the meantime, after the washing machine, you've got a conveyor furnace that has a conveyor belt. So you got all this money you're paying for energy to keep this furnace hot while you're washing parts and so forth. So what they were challenged with was making a small washing machine to wash one piece at a time, so the parts could then immediately go onto the conveyor belt to get heat treated. And this Kaizen team successfully built a one piece wash at a time machine that they could then advance the parts one at a time onto the conveyor belt, and then also get rid of the washing machine, which takes up space. They could sell it to an equipment dealer, get rid of that. They don't need it, get it off the books, because in this particular state, you pay taxes on your equipment and so forth, get rid of the amortization expense and whatnot. On the right-hand side, they had problems with a certain weld that they made using a much bigger machine, and so they designed and built something to do seam welding here. And on the right-hand side, it shows a little lathe that's used to face off the copper electrode to ensure the quality of the weld. And so these are all made with little or no purchasing of equipment. On the left-hand side, those ultrasonic cleaners were already in-house and unused. They just put them to use. On the right-hand side, most of what you see was in-house. The little lathe was purchased from Grainger. The box for the electronics was purchased, but pretty much everything else was, this is just stuff that's expense. There's no capital equipment. That's another thing you got to realize about Kaizen here, is you're trying to figure out a way to make things, use your intelligence and combining mechanical, electrical engineering, whatever, use the intelligence of people, whether they have degrees or not in these fields, shop people, whoever, to make things that are don't end up on the capital list. And so in this way, you save a lot of money, and these things, of course, are not taxed. So it's a very interesting and creative way of thinking with Kaizen that is just lost. It's incredible. So what does Kaizen teach? It teaches you how to see things differently, how to be curious, how to be creative, how to think when you have less of that ability previous to Kaizen, to be persistent, discover and learn, a personal discipline to always, what did that previous slide say? It was rational, skeptical, unbiased analysis or evaluation of factual evidence. This is how you begin to think and evolve, and you teach this to others. What you see on the right-hand side are some words paraphrased from what some guys at Toyota had to say about Kaizen people. Kaizen people were Henjin, meaning oddballs. It's the oddball crew because the way they think. And part of the way they think, if you look from the top right, and we'll go clockwise, full-fledged Kaizen persons get angry at their half-hearted measures. And that's really true. When I've made Kaizen improvements, I think about it overnight, and then, the next day I'm going, that wasn't such a great idea after all. Let me try something different. And you do get angry at your half-hearted measures. Once you begin, you are unstoppable. Again, so true, because you want to keep trying to find ways to improve it. You want to keep looking at your process and saying, there's waste there. I know there is. I just can't see it. You have an affinity for change. And of course, this is the problem, because people that higher up in a company often don't have an affinity for change, or they don't have the affinity for the type of change that Kaizen brings about. Relentless rectification of abnormalities and relentless identification of abnormalities and immediate rectification. What that means is we have the normal condition, there's a problem, it's abnormal now, we correct it immediately. We don't sit there like we would normally do in a classically managed business and say, well, when are these people available? We got to establish a team, but they're going on vacation, so-and-so, and let's schedule. Yeah, it'll be a month before we actually get to solving this problem. No, it's immediate identification and rectification of this problem. Taichi Ono said, we are doomed to failure if we do not initiate a daily destruction of our various preconceptions. And Mr. Ono was talking about preconceptions related to economics and production and manufacturing and so forth, but there's many preconceptions that we have to destroy to evolve and progress as times change. And let me share with you some anti-Kaizen preconceptions that are common amongst people and especially among leaders of the way they think, that you don't necessarily know it. They don't come out and say this, that, yeah, humans have limitations. Executive team might say some of these things amongst themselves, but they typically don't come out and say it to everybody in the company. Support and defend the status quo. But based upon some of the decisions that they made, they're exactly doing these things of supporting and defending the status quo, which is itself an example of respecting traditions. From experience that some of the decisions they make are illogical, and that informs us that they must think that logic is slow and laborious. That if you've presented to a boss some ideas to try different things, that they're like, well, why don't you just pick the best one and do that? That they don't think trial and error is a good plan, etc. At the bottom it says avoid abstract schemes. What's a more abstract scheme than Kaizen, right? That's a really abstract scheme. How are we going to improve this process? Don't know. Blank box plus blank box equals 7. We know the goal, but we don't know how we're going to do it. That's an abstract scheme. Continuous change destabilizes. Yeah, well, we are continuously changing anyway. Tomorrow's different than today. We got to progress, keep up and evolve and keep up with changing times. But, that's not what some bosses like. They'll say, you'll hear bosses say, well, things are pretty good the way it's going. The alternatives could be worse. There's no interest in experimentation or exploration there. Whatever is right. Hierarchical control is really important. You've got to revere these institutions. So this is all anti-Kaizen way of thinking, scenario X. So you can make change without progress, but you can't make progress without change. Toyota style Kaizen is indeed fundamental. So what's the promise? Kaizen, change for the better, keep up with the times, evolve not just the company and how it, the collection of people think and do things, but also individually as well. And of course, the peril is business as usual. And if you're making money and making a lot of money and things look good, then that's the threat that you face. So I'm happy to take any questions that you may have. We'll stop the share here.
Thanks, Bob. That was awesome.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So just before we begin, thanks, Bob, for that very insightful presentation. I love that phrase, turning gold into lead. I'm gonna use that more often. That's a good one.
Yeah, it's really a bad situation.
But my key takeaway from the entire presentation was, Kaizen, has been used as an approach to solve problems versus to inspire creations and creativity, to build and spur that thinking capability within our teams and our people. And ultimately, I love how you instead of spending money, we spend ideas to solve problems, which is really, really cool. I like that, and it's good to have that reminder again. So thank you very much. Personally, I really, really like that one.
Good.
Before we get into questions and answers, I just want to encourage you, everyone, to stay connected and continue this conversation that we sparked today. Explore these opportunities for collaboration by joining our LinkedIn page and visiting our YouTube channel, which we'll be putting the record of this session. I'll put links in the chat. And now it's a good time for us to transition into the Q&A. Please feel free to post your questions in the chat or utilize the raise hand feature if you prefer to ask your question verbally. Remember to unmute yourself before speaking. I know I'm going to say this, but it always happens all the time. Don't forget to unmute yourself. And we're eager to hear your questions and engage in a really cool discussion. At this time, feel free to start posting or raising your hand.
And wait, I'm wearing my Engine Crew t-shirt.
Hey, was that supposed to be like a guitar pick, like for when because you played bass guitar, right?
Yeah, I was fooling around with shapes, and I liked that one when I was creating the graphic.
Figures. I was like, oh yeah, he's probably sitting back to his guitar days.
Well, yeah, it wasn't quite that. A circle is sort of trite, and I don't know, just looking for something different. Any
Awesome. Yeah, I
questions?
put the links in the chat there. Okay, let's see here. I'll start off with a question. So
Yeah.
I know that we're always supposed to go to one piece flow, right?
Yeah.
But is there an opportunity where maybe you need a batch to keep the flow going? Because I
Absolutely.
know everybody's always going one piece flow, one piece flow, one piece flow, but
Yeah.
maybe one piece flow doesn't work.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and what you want to try to do is, what was the words earlier? Rational, skeptical, unbiased analysis and evaluation of factual evidence. Okay, so our batch now is 200. Does it need to be 200? What would happen if we changed the batch to 150 or 100? So a little experimentation around that, and then you might find, well, if we make it 100, that creates a problem somewhere else, but that doesn't mean we should go to 200. Back to 200, it means we should try to fix that problem somewhere else. So it's this inquisitive mind and wanting to experiment, and you can quickly recover and go back to 200 in the interim while you figure out what went wrong, or you could try to figure out what went wrong in real time. So it's this idea of let's try it and see. And so if we successfully get to 100, we might say, well, what happens if we get to 50? And this is what Toyota did to get down to one piece flow. They didn't just say make it go one piece flow. They stepped down piece at a time. And when they got to one piece flow, the reason why one piece flow is important is because you can do 100% inspection of your parts. And then you have to figure out, by the way, how to do an inspection quickly, right? Because most people will say 100% inspection takes too long. But what you're doing is you're inspecting some key characteristic of the part at each step along the way. And you're using, for example, in my manufacturing world, you're using a gauge, something that's been, you have a dimension on a part and you just put a go, no go gauge on it. And you go like that. It's 1 second, one breath, boom, done. And maybe the gauge has two ways to measure. You go like that, flip the gauge and measure that. Okay, done. Part is good. And then if the part's no good, then you bring your team leader in and you figure out what's causing the problem in real time, or you have to take it offline if it's like an anomaly. But if it keeps producing bad parts, then you stop. So you would go down stepwise and put it that way.
We do have one more question up here, Bob. This one's from Brian. He says, Bob, thanks for the brilliant presentation. Do you have a book, or can you recommend a book which outlines how management can create the atmosphere for critical thinking without losing the focus on core business?
Yep. So I was the lead author on a book called Better Thinking, Better Results. And that describes the wire molds lean transformation and how management created that atmosphere for critical thinking without losing the focus on business results. So that'll be the one that will really inform you of that. I just lost my train of thought for a second on the answer. Yeah, but thank you. I'm glad you liked the presentation, by the way.
Let's see here. Says that's interesting because my management consulting company is called Better Projects.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Next up, we have a hand raised, and that's Karen. Karen, go for your question.
Yeah, thanks. Great presentation, Bob. One thing that struck me is you talked about curiosity, and I find that by my nature, I'm a curious person. And in some ways, I'm a bit frustrated in the lack of curiosity of some other people. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on how to inspire curiosity in people who don't seem to have it as their first nature.
A good question. I think that a lot of people have been burned, by being curious. And I think the curiosity is there if they're allowed to be curious. And difficulty we always face is in a hierarchical organization, and it's even a little worse in, we work somewhere for a living, so it's a hierarchical economic organization. And, for many of us, money is constantly on the radar screen. Bosses say, a lot about money and so forth. And if you're a manager, that filters down to you and so on. And so we become averse to experimenting, and we don't want to get yelled at. And a lot of times we get yelled at in front of our perhaps peer group, which is very uncomfortable, and so on. So I think fundamentally, I mean, what I've experienced is the creativity is there, but it really all depends upon management, essentially allowing people to think. I mean, Fujio Cho, the former president and chairman of Toyota, had a long quote about Kaizen, and the conclusion of the quote was, people must be allowed to think. And what he's talking about is think in a curious, creative way for whatever type of problem comes up, and not just in the band-aid sense of, you know, how people would normally solve a problem. That answer your question, Karen? If not, have at it again.
Yeah, no, I think that is insightful. Yeah, that people maybe have repressed that that in their nature because they've been burned in the past, and so then it's not even a habit for them because of their past. So yeah, to allow that creativity is a good idea. Yeah, thank you.
We may be similar in the sense that I'm willing to experiment regardless of the personal consequences. If you follow me on LinkedIn, you know I've caught a lot of shit from people for things that I've said and so forth. And really, my LinkedIn posts I look at them as experiments to see what resonates with people, to see what doesn't, and so forth. And I get people that are really pissed off with me for things that I've said or written about, you know. But you know, if I and this, by the way, is not just on it was in prior jobs too, you know. When I was
some people
industry,
might read your posts and think you're anti-lean, and in fact, you're quite the opposite. And I
Yeah,
hope this presentation kind of proves it, right?
Yeah. I mean, people are kind of just, they're not curious. They're not looking below the surface. That post seems anti-lean. Well, you know, they're not thinking for themselves. They're not looking below the surface. There is a groupthink out there amongst certain lean promoters and influencers that, yeah, I'm anti-lean, and it's totally wrong. But whatever, you know, sometimes it's difficult to figure things out, and they've fallen into that trap.
No worries there. Let's see here. We still got a couple more minutes. If you guys want some questions or comments, you get a lot of thumbs up there. Great, amazing presentation from Tara. Thank you. Great presentation, Bob. You're true to your books, Angelo. Cam's got a question here. Bob, could you comment on the rate or result of degradation you mentioned? Should senior leaders not allow these practices and growth? Does this accelerate drastically?
Let me absorb that. Could you comment on the rate? Yeah, I mean, you know, this one of the problems in, you know, human evolution was tools are very useful to humans. That's how we survived, you know, millions of years ago, hundreds of thousands of years ago, and so forth. So it's probably built into our way of thinking that a tool is more useful than a system. And we really didn't have to think about systems until about 10,000 years ago with agriculture. Prior to that, we didn't look at our you know, community of pre-Neolithic revolution people as a system. We didn't understand why it rained. You know, we didn't understand anything. So there is this just sort of rush to turn gold into lead, to deconstruct the system and turn it into a bunch of tools. And this degradation started happening very early on, you know, in lean world. So if we mark lean as 1998 when the term first became popular, it wasn't, you know, it was almost immediately a few years thereafter where it starts getting deconstructed into these tools. If you take it as 1973 when Toyota, people started becoming familiar with Toyota production system, it immediately turned into just in time for a lot of people. Just this Kanban and just in time and limited to that. So, and in truth, it is difficult to understand. You know, you're going from Japanese to English, a translation, and it's kind of legendary, the stories that the Toyota people themselves didn't really understand it well enough to really explain it to outsiders. And so the outsiders come away with a very limited understanding of it. And also, a lot of the outsiders that went to have the initial looks at this thing in the 1970s through the 1980s, they were like industrial engineers and technical people. So they're looking at the technical aspects more than the human aspects, even though industrial engineering at that time had something called human factors, and they, looked at various human aspects, but not necessarily behavioral aspects that are of interest to us, these days. So the degradation happened very early on, and that's consistent with prior iterations of progressive management. And let's see, senior leaders not allow for these practices. Well, yeah, I mean, senior leaders should not allow for that, but they also fall into the trap themselves of using various tools. And if you're in big companies, they look at consultants like McKinsey and so forth, and those consultants are very tool oriented for solutions to problems. So you have to consciously want to get away from these tools or understand the tools in a larger system. I mean, I remember decades ago when the book Learning to See came out. I was upset by that because to me was a workbook that embodied the gold to lead deconstruction of TPS and the Toyota way, which we didn't understand much about the Toyota way at the time, but certainly the deconstruction of TPS. Because, and I told one of the persons there that you need to represent this book on the cover with like a puzzle, pieces of a puzzle, and showing that the value stream map fills in one piece of a larger puzzle. You need to represent TPS as a system and the value stream map as a piece. So you have, the typical image of talking about of puzzles, and then one piece shows it in red. Okay, that's the value stream map. And they're like, stupid idea. We're not going to bother with that or whatever. But so LEI has gone, and others. This is not picking on them because all these organizations went the tool route and have training and workbooks and videos and so forth that are very tool oriented and not how these tools are part of the overall system. That's a story I never told anybody, by the way, at least what's going to be publicly now about the puzzle thing.
Well, it's an interesting story. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I mean, and the reason why is because there was also books available by Yasuhiro Mandan, who talked about, and it was published in the early 90s, called maybe the mid 90s, Toyota Management System, where he showed, the various pieces and how they fit and so forth, and brilliantly so, not perfectly so, but brilliantly so. And that book is like, ho hum, who cares? And that was a really important book that nobody cared about. I'll make a note to stick that on LinkedIn here.
Yeah, please do. I'm going to look into that one.
Yeah, that was a fabulous book. And generally, Yasuhiro Mandan's work has been neglected, and it's just a shame. If you're a reader, it's Monden. Mandan is the last name. Yasu, Yasuhiro, Yasuhiro Mandan. Great stuff. And you can find these books used for $5 or $10, or $3, $2 online from Amazon or Libris Books, or just look at. You ever look on Bookfinder? Bookfinder.com. If you're ever looking for a rare book, go to Bookfinder.com. Great source. It scans
nice
everywhere.
Plug.
Yeah.
One more question, Bob.
Yeah.
Brian has a question here. Can you name any companies that you have seen that are doing it right?
I when we did the book Better Thinking, Better Results about wire mold, this was a great example. It tends to be ephemeral because there's changes in management and changes in ownership of the company. To know whether they're doing it right, you would want to see a lot of evidence of Kaizen activity ongoing, not Kaizen once a month, but daily Kaizen activity going on throughout the organization. You're going to want to see a lot of visual controls. You're going to want to see examples of flow, material and information flow. You're going to want to see a lot of, basically smiling faces, because one of the objectives of Kaizen is to simplify the work and make it easier. Because once you eliminate problems in the work, you start to take away the blame game, blaming people for problems. With Kaizen, you're focused on causes of the problem, not people being the problem, but causes of the problem that are not people related. So you create a better world for people because you eliminate the blame. So you want to look for an environment where there's no blame. Jeez, I'm sorry, my phone's going crazy here with stuff. I apologize for that. Let me sit on it. So anyway, so that's what I would look for as evidence of that kind of thing. And also leadership engagement. Are the leaders engaged in Kaizen? Because you're learning new things. I mean, classical management is, how do we say it? Classical management is like, what's a good example? Classical management, it's just, let's say it's mechanical engineering is classical management. But TPS and Toyota Way are physics. It's different. It's something different, or it's medicine. It's something completely different. And they're not the same. And they share a few similarities, but they're basically something completely different. And so if the leaders aren't engaged in Kaizen, they're not learning these different things that people at the lower levels are learning, and will eventually tell the managers, this metric is no good. It's causing us all kinds of problems. And the bosses will say, yeah, but we need that metric. We're not going to change it. They're not going to change it because they weren't on the Kaizen team to know what a problem that metric was. So I'd look for leadership engagement. They have to be involved in Kaizen, once a quarter. You're seeing this at General Electric under Larry Culp, the CEO there, Lawrence Culp, of that none of these leaders can say no to Kaizen. They all have to get engaged with it because they all have to learn something new. And I think they're mostly willing to do it under new leadership, because the new leadership says it's fun, you'll have a good time, you'll learn stuff. When you have that kind of leader, the subordinate executives follow suit.
Awesome. Well, Bob, again, thank you for sharing your insights with us today. And to everyone in attendance, thank you for being a part of Lean-YEG and contributing to the growth of a thriving lean community here in Edmonton. And we hope that your day is both productive and fulfilling. And happy Thanksgiving to all of our American friends as well, too.
Thank you. It's been great. Thank you, Abel.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you so much. Hopefully we can have you again soon sometime.
My pleasure.